Silas stood under the hot stream of water, letting the heat relax his muscles. The shower was always his space to think, to unwind after long days at university. He ran his fingers through his wet hair, his thoughts drifting to the strange new dynamic in his life. Davin, his new stepbrother, had moved in a few months ago. They had grown up in completely different worlds, Silas, the quiet, introverted type, while Davin was more outgoing, confident, the kind of person who always drew attention in any room. Though they hadn't known each other long, living under the same roof had quickly created a connection neither of them had anticipated. Silas sighed, leaning his head against the cool tile as the steam filled the bathroom. The house was quiet, as it often was this time of day. Everyone else was out, and it was just the two of them. Alone. As if summoned by his thoughts, Silas heard the faint creak of the bathroom door opening. His heart skipped a beat. No one else should be home except Davin. Silas. Davin's deep voice broke the stillness, his tone casual but carrying that unmistakable hint of mischief that always seemed to linger between them. Silas could sense him stepping inside, though the shower curtain kept them separated. "What are you doing in here?" Silas called over the water, trying to keep his voice steady, though a flicker of excitement stirred in his chest. "Forgot something," Davin replied, but there was a hesitation in his voice, a lingering tension that told Silas this wasn't just about grabbing some forgotten item. Silas closed his eyes, the rush of the water suddenly not enough to drown out the way his pulse quickened. There had been subtle moments like this over the past few weeks, passing glances, casual touches that lingered a little too long, but neither had said a word about it. Davin didn't leave. Instead, Silas could hear him moving closer. His breath caught in his throat, the water streaming over his skin only intensifying the heat between them. "Are you done yet?" Davin's voice was closer now, the teasing edge unmistakable. Silas could feel him just on the other side of the curtain, the air between them thick with an unspoken energy. Silas turned the faucet off and grabbed his towel, still dripping wet as he pulled the curtain back. There stood Davin, leaning against the sink, his eyes meeting Silas's with a look that said everything they hadn't dared speak out loud. Davin's gaze flickered over Silas's bare chest, his tongue darting across his lips almost subconsciously. "Guess I'll wait," he said softly, but neither of them moved. Silas stepped out of the shower, water pooling at his feet as he stood inches away from Davin. The tension in the small space was palpable, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. Silas could feel the heat radiating off Davin, could see the way his breath quickened ever so slightly. Neither of them spoke. The silence said enough. Then, almost as if by instinct, Davin reached out, his hand brushing against Silas's damp skin. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth through Silas's entire body. Silas didn't pull away. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the small gap between them, his heart racing as Davin's hand slid up his arm, slow, deliberate. Their eyes never left each other, the weight of the moment heavy between them. "Davin," Silas whispered, his voice low, uncertain. Davin's hand moved to Silas's face, his thumb brushing lightly across his cheek. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Davin admitted, his voice hushed, barely above a whisper. "I can't stop." Silas swallowed hard, his breath shaky as he leaned into Davin's touch. He had felt it too, the pull between them, the way their connection had shifted from something purely familial to something much more complicated, much more intense. Without thinking, Silas closed the distance between them, his lips brushing against Davin's in a soft, tentative kiss. It was slow at first, testing, exploring, but the moment their lips met, everything else seemed to fade away. Davin responded instantly, his arms wrapping around Silas's waist, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. There was no hesitation now, no second-guessing. The attraction between them had been undeniable for weeks, and now, it was unleashed. Silas felt Davin's hands move over his damp skin, tracing the contours of his body with a deliberate slowness that made every touch feel like fire. His own hands found their way to Davin's shoulders, pulling him even closer as the kiss became more urgent, more intense. Their bodies pressed together, the heat of the moment overtaking them as they moved in sync, lost in the passion that had been simmering just below the surface for so long. Silas could feel Davin's breath against his neck as his lips moved from his mouth, trailing soft kisses along his jawline, down to his collarbone. "Davin," Silas breathed, his voice trembling with the intensity of it all. He wasn't sure what they were doing, where this was going, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All he cared about was the feeling of Davin's touch, the way his hands roamed his body with an urgency that matched his own desire. Davin's hands slid lower, tracing the muscles of Silas's back before coming to rest on his hips. He pulled him even closer, their bodies perfectly aligned as they stood in the small, steamy bathroom, the tension between them growing with every passing second. Silas tilted his head back slightly, his breath coming in short gasps as Davin's lips continued to explore his skin. Every kiss, every touch sent waves of pleasure coursing through him, and he knew he was completely lost in the moment. "Is this, okay?" Davin asked, his voice barely a whisper as he pulled back slightly, his eyes searching Silas's face for any sign of hesitation. Silas nodded, his heart racing. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice breathless. "I want this." With that, Davin kissed him again, deeper this time, more insistent. They stumbled backward, their movements becoming more frantic as they reached the edge of the sink. Davin lifted Silas onto the counter, his hands gripping his hips as their lips moved together in a heated, desperate kiss. Silas wrapped his legs around Davin's waist, pulling him closer as the intensity between them grew. Every touch, every kiss was electric, filled with a passion that had been building for weeks, months even. They were both completely consumed by it now, lost in the heat of the moment, the weight of their desire too strong to ignore any longer. In that small bathroom, with the steam still hanging in the air, they let go of everything else, their worries, their doubts, the world outside. All that mattered was the two of them, together, finally giving in to the feelings they had kept hidden for so long. And for the first time, it felt right. Davin's hands gripped Silas's hips, pulling him closer as he kissed him again, their bodies fitting together perfectly. The steam from the shower still lingered in the air, wrapping around them, adding to the heat that already burned between them. Silas's heart pounded in his chest as he felt Davin's lips on his neck, his warm breath sending shivers down his spine. Davin's kisses were slow, deliberate, as if savoring every inch of Silas's skin. Silas tilted his head back, letting himself get lost in the sensation, his fingers threading through Davin's dark hair, pulling him closer. The feeling was overwhelming, every touch, every kiss sent waves of pleasure through him, making his head spin. He could feel the desire building between them, the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long finally spilling over. "Davin," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible as his breath hitched in his throat. Davin's hands slid from Silas's hips, exploring his body, his touch both gentle and firm. He could feel every muscle under his fingertips, the warmth of Silas's skin, the way his body responded to every touch. There was something intoxicating about it, something that made it impossible to stop. "You're perfect," Davin murmured against Silas's skin, his lips brushing against the sensitive spot just below his ear. Silas shuddered at the words, a flush of heat spreading through his body. He had never felt anything like this before, so intense, so all-consuming. His fingers tightened in Davin's hair as he pulled him into another deep, hungry kiss. Davin's hands roamed Silas's back, his touch setting fire to every nerve. Silas's body arched into his, craving more of the contact, more of the connection that had them both on edge. The way their bodies moved together, the way their lips met in a perfect rhythm, it was as if they had been waiting for this moment for far too long. Silas broke the kiss for a moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he caught his breath. He stared into Davin's eyes, searching for any hesitation, any sign that he might want to stop. But all he saw was the same desire that burned within him. "Don't stop," Silas whispered, his voice trembling with the intensity of the moment. Davin's eyes darkened, his hands gripping Silas's waist tighter as he kissed him again, harder this time, with a hunger that matched Silas's own. There was no holding back now, no more pretending they didn't feel this way. They moved together as if guided by instinct, their bodies pressing closer, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Silas could feel Davin's heartbeat against his chest, the steady rhythm matching his own racing pulse. Silas's fingers traced the lines of Davin's muscles, memorizing every detail, every curve, as if afraid this moment might slip away too quickly. He wanted to savor every second, to hold on to the feeling of being this close, this connected. Davin's hands slid lower, his fingers brushing against Silas's bare skin, sending a jolt of electricity through him. Silas gasped at the touch, his body responding to every movement, every whisper of Davin's breath against his skin. Their lips met again, softer this time, more tender. It was a kiss filled with all the unspoken words, the feelings they had been too afraid to acknowledge before. Silas melted into the kiss, his heart swelling with emotions he could barely contain. "I've wanted this," Davin whispered against his lips, his voice low, filled with emotion. "I've wanted you." Silas felt his chest tighten at the words, his own feelings rushing to the surface. He had felt the same for so long, but he had never been able to put it into words. Now, in this moment, with Davin's hands on him, his lips brushing against his, it all made sense. "I want you too," Silas breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I always have." Davin's eyes softened at the confession, his lips curling into a small smile before he leaned in to kiss Silas again. This time, the kiss was slow, deep, filled with the weight of everything they had both been holding back for so long. Silas's hands roamed Davin's body, his touch gentle, exploring, as if trying to memorize every inch of him. The closeness between them was overwhelming, the intensity of their connection almost too much to bear. As they kissed, time seemed to blur around them. The world outside the bathroom, the responsibilities, the worries, none of it mattered anymore. All that existed was this moment, the two of them tangled together, their lips, their bodies, their hearts completely in sync. Eventually, they pulled apart, their foreheads resting against each other as they caught their breath. Silas's chest rose and fell rapidly, his heart still pounding from the intensity of it all. Davin smiled softly, brushing a strand of wet hair from Silas's forehead. "We should probably get out of here before the bathroom floods," he teased, his voice light, but there was an unmistakable tenderness in his gaze. Silas laughed breathlessly, his cheeks flushing with warmth. "Yeah, probably." They stood there for a moment longer, neither of them wanting to break the connection between them. But eventually, Davin pulled away, offering Silas his hand. "Come on," he said, his voice gentle. "Let's get out of here." Silas took his hand, feeling a sense of calm wash over him as Davin led him out of the steamy bathroom. They didn't need to say anything, the unspoken bond between them said it all. As they stepped into the cool air of the hallway, Silas felt a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever happened next, he knew they had crossed a line they could never uncross. But for the first time, it felt right. And for the first time, Silas knew he wasn't alone. Davin led Silas down the hallway, their hands still linked, the warmth of the moment lingering between them. The house was quiet, the only sound their soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. Silas's heart still raced, but it was different now, calmer, more sure. Everything that had been left unsaid for weeks was now understood, and that brought a strange comfort. They reached Silas's room, the familiar space feeling suddenly more intimate than ever. Davin glanced around, his gaze settling on the bed before he turned back to Silas with a soft smile. "Are you okay?" Davin asked quietly, his thumb gently stroking the back of Silas's hand. There was concern in his eyes, a tenderness that made Silas's chest tighten. Silas nodded, his pulse steadying as he met Davin's gaze. "Yeah. I'm good," he said softly, though the emotions swirling inside him were anything but simple. Davin gave a small nod, his smile returning as he guided Silas to sit on the edge of the bed. Silas's heart fluttered as he sat, the mattress sinking under his weight. Davin stood in front of him for a moment, just looking at him, as if memorizing the moment. Without a word, Davin knelt in front of him, his hands resting on Silas's knees. The gesture was simple, but it carried so much weight. Silas could feel the sincerity, the quiet intensity in Davin's touch. His breath hitched as Davin's fingers gently slid up his thighs, sending a soft tremor through his body. Silas bit his lip, his heart hammering in his chest again as Davin's hands traced the outline of his legs, his touch slow and deliberate, as if savoring every inch. Davin's gaze never left Silas's face, his eyes dark with emotion, with a desire that was matched by Silas's own. "Silas," Davin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're beautiful." Silas's face flushed, his breath catching in his throat at the words. He didn't know how to respond, his heart too full to find the right words. Instead, he leaned forward, his fingers brushing through Davin's hair as he pulled him in for a kiss. This kiss was different, deeper, more intense, filled with a quiet passion that made Silas's entire body tremble. Davin's hands slid higher, wrapping around Silas's waist, pulling him closer as their lips moved together, slow and sensual. Silas felt a warmth spread through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the shower and everything to do with the way Davin's touch made him feel, wanted, cherished, loved. His fingers tightened in Davin's hair, his lips parting as Davin deepened the kiss, his tongue brushing gently against Silas's, coaxing a soft gasp from him. Davin's hands roamed up Silas's back, his touch sending shivers through his body as they kissed, their movements slow but deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world. Silas could feel Davin's breath on his skin, the soft hum of his heartbeat against his chest, and it was the most intoxicating thing he had ever felt. "Davin," Silas whispered against his lips, his voice trembling. He didn't even know what he wanted to say, only that he needed to feel Davin's touch, needed to be closer to him, needed to be wrapped in the warmth and safety of this moment. Davin pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against Silas's, his breath warm and steady. "We don't have to rush," he whispered, his voice gentle, reassuring. "I'm not going anywhere." Silas nodded, his heart swelling at the words. The sincerity in Davin's voice, the promise of more than just this moment, made everything feel so much deeper, so much more meaningful. "I know," Silas whispered back, his fingers still tangled in Davin's hair as he leaned in for another soft kiss, this one tender, filled with all the emotions he couldn't put into words. Davin kissed him back, slow and steady, his hands sliding up Silas's arms, pulling him even closer. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's warmth, the rest of the world fading away as they focused only on each other. Eventually, Davin pulled away, his hands gently cupping Silas's face. "Let's lie down," he suggested softly, his voice a gentle murmur that made Silas's heart flutter. Silas nodded, his breath hitching as he followed Davin's lead, lying back on the bed as Davin settled beside him. The soft light filtering through the curtains bathed them in a warm glow, adding to the sense of peace that enveloped them both. Davin's hand found Silas's again, their fingers intertwining as they lay there, side by side, their breaths slowly sinking. Silas's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the weight of everything they had shared grounding him in the moment. "You're amazing," Davin whispered, his voice low, almost reverent as his thumb brushed over Silas's knuckles. "I've wanted this for so long." Silas turned his head to look at Davin, his heart swelling at the confession. "Me too," he admitted softly, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. Davin's eyes softened, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Silas's forehead, then his cheek, then his lips, each one filled with a tenderness that made Silas's heart flutter. They lay there, tangled in each other's arms, the warmth between them only growing as they held on to the moment, savoring the quiet intimacy that had taken so long to build. Silas closed his eyes, his head resting against Davin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He felt safe, loved, and for the first time in a long while, he knew that this was exactly where he was meant to be.